And hello again from wjlive, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for the Western Journal. Welcome to a special episode. First off, we hope your Easter weekend was wonderful. We hope you celebrated because, as we say, He is risen. And He is risen indeed. And we are thrilled for that. And we are thrilled that we have eternal life through Christ. But that's not why this is a special episode. This is a special episode after Easter. But this is a special episode because we are taking a deeper look, doing a deeper dive into probably the largest conservative media victory in years. And what I'm talking about there is the Citizens United film called Rigged. You can get a look at Rigged. You can get your own copy, actually, by going to rigged2020.com. This is the film that brought down Mark Zuckerberg's election meddling, I think it would be fair to say, empire. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, right before the election, in 2020, Mark Zuckerberg gave away over $400 million, about $400 million even. He did it through the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, and that $400 million went to supposedly help mitigate COVID concerns when it comes to the election. But when Citizens United dug around, what they found was that $400 million was used for a lot of other things, a lot of nefarious things. We've done a lot of coverage of this over the last week, and really week to 10 days, and the reason is because it's unbelievably important. And in fact, it is so important that it has brought Zuckerberg down. Zuckerberg announced last week he would not be contributing money the same way to affect elections in 2022. That is an enormous victory for conservatives. That's why I say it's the biggest victory for conservative media in years, possibly decades. So we're going to do a couple things today. First off, we sat down with President of Citizens United, David Bossie. David narrated the film and helped create it. He talks with us about the film, the victory that the film brought about, and why it's so important. We're going to take that interview, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to bring you some of the most explosive clips from the film itself. Remember, you can get a copy of the film for $4.99. It's the best price I've ever seen for a movie, for $4.99 by going to rigged2020.com. David Bossie sat down with us last week. We're going to bring him back to talk about the film. And Dave, thanks so much for joining us here on wjlive. We appreciate it. Hey, late breaking news. I think you have seen this already. I think this is a direct response to Rigged, the film that you helped make. Zuckerberg is shutting down political donations. Do I have that right?
It's an amazing, in my opinion, admission of what he did in 2020 was wrong. A statement by Zuckerberg, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and their spokesman saying that they will no longer financially participate in the midterm elections is a dramatic statement. It is a direct result of the power of our film Rigged. And I just urge everyone to go to rigged2020.com. Watch the film that forced Mark Zuckerberg into an admission and that he is not going to fund any more election operations. This is a major victory, in my opinion, for the conservative movement.
So the film we're talking about, again, you can check it out at rigged2020.com. This is a documentary about how Zuckerberg really did, through massive contributions, help rig or help steal the 2020 election. And he did it before a single vote was cast. And right. Dave, they have been doing this for years. We've known they've been doing this for years. It's just Zuckerberg was so big, it was hard to miss what he was doing. The film has made an enormous difference now. Have you ever seen a victory this quickly for conservative media?
No, as a matter of fact, not just for conservative media, but taking on big tech, right? Which we as conservatives have been fighting big tech for years now. Taking on big tech and winning is just, it's quite honestly shocking to me that this has happened. But no more shocking than finding out that Mark Zuckerberg spent $400 million in the 2020 election cycle to help put his thumb on the scale to help Joe Biden win. And just to put it in perspective, as we do in the film, the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, spent $461 million over 2 years, 2019, 2020, for commercials, digital campaigns, overhead, staff, you name it, $461 million in 2 years. Mark Zuckerberg spent $400 million in about the last 120 days of the election, and it was totally off the books, meaning no one knew it because he ran it through these two 501c3 organizations that have no disclosure requirements. And this money wasn't spent on TV ads. It was spent on actual election day activities, the employees, the equipment that counts the votes. That's the power that Mark Zuckerberg had in 2020 and should never happen again. And now, thankfully, Zuckerberg has seen the power of conservative media. And I say that because no one in the mainstream media really covered this film. The Washington Post, to their credit, wrote a couple of pieces on it, and Politico wrote one piece. But other than that, this entire launch has been driven by conservative media like yours that have educated the American people to what Zuckerberg did. And without it, Zuckerberg would be free to do what he wants.
Dave, that statistic about Democrats, the DNC having spent 400 and I think you said 60 something million over 2 years, Zuckerberg spending 400 million, that's an eye-watering figure. Another figure that stuck out to me from the film is at one point you say there is one enormous chunk of money that CTCL gave away, and 92% of that money went to Biden counties. Is that correct?
It was shocking to me. Look, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which is one of the two 501c3s that received the majority of the money, about $327 million from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And just to put them in perspective for a minute, in 2019, their budget, I believe, was $1 million. Okay, CTCL, so Center for Tech and Civic Life, $1 million in 2019. In 2020, their budget was $328 million. That's just an unbelievable investment by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative into that organization. And CTCL, that organization, is run by two hardcore left-wing activists, Tiana Epps Johnson and Donnie Bridges. Both came from the New Organizing Institute, a hardcore left-wing digital operation training center. And Tiana Epps Johnson is an Obama fellow. So still to this day. So these people are not nonpartisan folks that the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative was funding for some sort of safe election activity. This money went and was overseen at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. The chief strategist there is David Plouffe, Barack Obama's campaign manager. I mean, none of this makes sense. None of this, should have been able to happen. And so that's why the power of this film now has driven Mark Zuckerberg to have to admit that he will never do that again. And I hope we can keep him to it.
Dave, one of the names that stuck out to me, there are a lot of different stories in the film. Again, we're talking about Rigged. You can get a copy of this at rigged2020.com. One of the stories that stuck out to me was a story about Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. You're talking about people who are liberal, people who are leftist, people who are related to Democrat causes. Can you tell us a little bit? The thing that just killed me was the guy showed up in a ballot counting room with, depending on who you ask, 4 of the 5 or 5 of the 6 keys to the ballot counting facility. Can you tell us about Michael Spitzer Rubenstein?
Yeah, it was shocking. This guy, Spitzer Rubenstein, is from the Bronx. He's a liberal activist that nobody's ever heard of. Yet, he's there on behalf of CTCL and is an agent, if you will, or employee of Mark Zuckerberg, which is how Michael Gableman, who is a former Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin and the special counsel appointed by the state legislature, who's been over the last year investigating the Wisconsin problems of their elections. He identified and he has requested that Michael Spitzer Rubenstein come to Wisconsin back from New York City to sit for an interview, to ask him these questions about what did you do, how did you fund it, where did the money come from, who gave you the orders, who did you give orders to, how did this work? These are some of the fundamental questions that the person who ran it should be required to answer. And of course, Michael Spitzer Rubenstein is not making himself available for an investigation that's ongoing that we could really uncover. And this is just because this is part of the ongoing effort by the left to run and rig elections. Look, who in America wants to vote for higher gas prices, for massive inflation, for weakness at home and abroad, a feckless foreign policy, what is going on in Ukraine, a violent crime crisis across our nation, open borders, and a border crisis created by Joe Biden, one crisis after another, all created by President Biden. None of them inherited by President, from the Trump administration. So this is why the left has to take these types of actions. That's why the left must do these things, because they can't win, because the American people are going to reject those types of incredibly bad policies. And I think that's why they did it in 2020, and that's why they want to do it again in the future.
Yeah, and the American people have rejected those policies. That's why, as you're saying, that's why they had to do this. That was the only way that they could win. And they were playing the game. They were playing the long game. Long before the election hit, they were setting this up.
We never saw it coming. What you just said is so important. We didn't see it coming. We didn't see around the corners that people who run big presidential campaigns and the RNC must see coming. They have to. And we have to do a better job for our candidates, because if we fail, just like in 2020, President Trump is the one who pays the price, and the American people pay the price because of what happened to President Trump. Look, President Trump has said for the last 18 months the election was rigged and stolen. Now this film, Rigged, gives the American people the facts and the evidence to back up that claim for the first time. That's why the power of this film has driven Mark Zuckerberg to make the announcement he will no longer fund election activities. This film is really an answer to the thirst that the American people have had as to what happened in 2020. So I urge everybody to go see it. But let me just say once, the Zuckerberg defenders state that of the 2,500 grants that the CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, gave out, a majority of those went to red or Trump counties or districts. And my answer to that is I don't care, because that's not the money. We followed the money. We tracked 162 of the 2,500 grants that were for $400,000 or more each grant, which totaled about $272 million. And 92% of that 272 million went to Biden districts. That's the power. And that is why we say Zuckerberg's money put his thumb on the scale to help Joe Biden win.
Well, that is why this film is so important. As you've noted, people after the election were walking around, conservatives were walking around almost dumbfounded. How could this have happened to us? We saw Trump's rallies versus Biden's rallies. We saw Trump parades versus no Biden parades.
They were Trump rallies versus Joe Biden trying to fill up, empty circles in a parking lot. Right. I mean, he was hiding in his basement. Right. He's hiding in his basement and he's running around trying to fill up 12 circles, and he had a hard time doing that. They had social distancing for automobiles in parking lots. They were so insane, and they couldn't even make that look good. How? And let me just give you an example in Arizona, where Joe Biden hardly campaigned. President Trump went there many times and had rallies with 40, 50,000 people in attendance. And Joe Biden hardly ever moved in Arizona. But in the funded counties versus the unfunded counties of using Zuckerberg's money, Joe Biden outperformed Hillary Clinton's 2016 historic numbers by 700,000 votes over the unfunded counties. So the funded counties, 700,000 more votes over the unfunded counties, and they only won by 10,000 votes. Think about that for a second. Without the Zuckerberg thumb on the scale, there's no question that Joe Biden doesn't win Arizona. And in Georgia, as an example, $50 million of Zuckerberg's money went into Georgia. $50 million. The most of any state in the country. I wonder why. I mean, it was the number one battleground state in the country. So $50 million goes into the state of Georgia. $45 million of that came from CTCL. And of that $45 million, 94% of $45 million in the state of Georgia went to Joe Biden districts. That is the power of Zuckerberg's money and the direct impact. Again, they only won by 10,000 votes in the state of Georgia. It is outrageous what they were able to pull off in the dark of night.
With the huge success of the film, and the film has been successful by any way you measure it, by sales, certainly by getting done what you wanted to get done, which is make a difference. Is this going to teach conservatives, is this going to teach Republicans that we have got to call out the left on their really criminal, or at least quasi-criminal, behavior? We seem to think that we all play by the same playbook, and we don't. Will this help disabuse Republicans of this idea? Oh, if we play fair, they will play fair.
We have to fight. We have to continue to fight. It's one of the reasons that I love President Trump. It's one of the reasons that President Trump and I have been working together for over 12 years now. He knows I'm a fighter, and he's a fighter. He's a fighter for the American people. And that's what this film really shows me. It should show everybody who's watching and listening to this, which is you have a voice. Make your voice heard. The power of this 40-minute documentary film forced one of the richest men in America to come to grips and be held to account for what he did in 2020, and he will not do it again in 2022, as he is saying. And the old saying goes, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so use your voice. Look, to be honest with you, I never thought we would take on big tech and win like we have done in a short week. This movie came out 1 week ago today. 1 week. It came out on April 5th. Okay, this is a dramatic event for the conservative movement, for Republicans across the country to be able to win at this level. It's not done very often, and we should take it seriously. We should study how it's done, and then go and do it again.
David Bossie, thank you for being here. David was the Trump campaign manager in 2016. He's the president of Citizens United. He is one of the brilliant brains behind the film Rigged. You can get it again at rigged2020.com. David, thank you so much for being with us here on wjlive.
Hey, thanks for having me. I look forward to doing it again soon.
it is looking more and more like this was not a case of ballots being stuffed in overnight. This was not a case of voting machines being tampered with by China. This is not a case of Dominion programming their voting machines ahead of time. There was no Kraken, as Sidney Powell famously said. What it was they figured out ahead of time how to game things. Now, I want to take you through some of the most shocking clips from the film in the last 10 or 15 minutes that we have here and show you some of the things. This is just a sample of what's in the film. But this is why Zuckerberg backed down. This is why Zuckerberg said, look, in 2022, we're not doing what we did in 2020. It's too hot. There's too much fire being directed at me. We're not doing it again. So first off, let's just talk solely about the money. Let's talk solely about the money. I want to pull that clip from Rigged. You can get it at rigged2020.com. Let's pull the clip. First clip I've got on the money.
Expenditures by the Democrat National Committee for the entire two-year 2020 election cycle totaled $461 million.
$461 million. So that's what all of the DNC spent over a two-year period. Over a two-year period across the nation, $461 million. Zuckerberg, using the Chan Zuckerberg-Foundation, gave $400 million. What would that be? 85, I'm not great at math, 85% of the entire DNC budget for the nation for 2 years, he gave in one lump sum. And if you think that that was evenly distributed between conservatives and liberals, between Republican and Democrat jurisdictions, you are woefully, woefully mistaken, my friend. And I'll tell you, the suggestion that it was distributed evenly, well, let me borrow a quote from President Trump about this. He said, literally, it's crap. Let's take that clip.
Well, look where he spent it. I've read where he spent 97% in Democrat areas. So he's putting money under the guise that he's going to open up the election and all of that. That's all crap. Not going to open it up. He's closing it. He's making it impossible for a Republican to win.
And when you think about that, imagine had Republicans gotten the same amount that they spent over a 2-year period. Imagine if the RNC had gotten a gift like that. Imagine if the Koch brothers had done that. Can you, you can't imagine the caterwauling that would have come from the left, from the media, from liberals, from academe, from Hollywood, all over the place. They would have talked about rich people buying the elections. We've seen what they have done with Elon Musk just floating the idea of acquiring Twitter. They have lost their minds. If conservatives or libertarians had given $400 million to Donald J. Trump, to the Republican Party, they would have gone nuts. But Zuckerberg did it, and hardly a peep was made. Now, the way he did that is he, like so many others on the left, he took advantage of COVID and the opportunities that afforded. They had already placed in position a narrative that said, we have to protect people above all costs. They can't be exposed. Forget masking. Masking's not enough. You need to stay in your home. You need to stay in your car. You don't get out. You don't expose yourself to other people. They would even, when they would go to rallies for Biden, one of the funniest videos we had all that year was video of a Biden rally where people showed up in their cars. It looked like it was about a dozen people in cars parked in a parking lot listening to Biden speak. It was ridiculous. So they had gotten the narrative out that we can't be exposed to each other for fear of the virus spreading. So the next step then was to make absentee balloting, mail-in balloting, and these new ballot drop boxes the go-to thing. So the Chan Zuckerberg-Foundation, they donated that money to CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And CTCL put together a bunch of grants, offered grants out to supposedly help mitigate COVID risks during the election. But it turns out there may have been an enormous bait and switch. Let's take that video.
The emails going back and forth are about buying equipment, buying more mail sorters.
Somewhere along the line, the evidence is showing that there may very well have been a bait and switch, that the bait was to keep citizens safe from COVID, but then it switched. It may very well have switched to a partisan get-out-the-vote effort on behalf of Joe Biden for the purpose of defeating Donald Trump.
Now, David Plouffe, who was involved in this setup, he's a longtime Democrat operative. He has made the point before that because Republicans are so much better at getting out their votes than Democrats, the Democrats start the race behind. And that's true. COVID presented the perfect opportunity for Democrats to overcome that gulf. If we have trouble getting our voters out, well, let's just not get them out. Let's just send ballots straight to them. And let's send ballots to everybody else we can possibly think of. And let's have people harvest those ballots. And let's have them go to nursing homes to harvest those ballots. And let's create these ballot drop boxes where people can drop ballots in overnight. Let's not worry about signature verification. The list goes on and on. And if you feel like that is a very unsafe, unsecure way to conduct an election, you would be right. And you know who would agree with you? Of all people, former President Jimmy Carter. Take that next video.
In 2005, the Carter-Baker Commission thoroughly examined flaws in America's election system. Unfortunately, those findings were ignored in 2020.
Carter-Baker Commission also concluded that one of the most serious sources of voter fraud are mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, that if you want to prevent voter fraud, you want to carefully limit when mail-in and absentee ballots are allowed. What did Zuckbucks do? It came in and pressured these governmental entities to do mail-in ballots, or even worse, these drop boxes, which was a new innovation for COVID, that is a rampant invitation to fraud.
A rampant invitation to cheating, a rampant invitation to buying an election. Russ, I want to skip the next video, so we're not going to do that one. I want to take the one after that in just a second. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about a bait and switch of historic proportion taking place. We're talking about grants being given out to turn out Democrat voters. You can find out more about this. Again, you can get the whole story by going to rigged2020.com and picking up a copy of the film for $4.99. The best deal you'll ever get, rigged2020.com. So you might be saying, well, gosh, how in the world were they able to do this? Didn't they have to give the grants to both sides? Didn't they have to give the grants to Republicans and Democrats? Well, yeah, they were supposed to, but as is so often the case, reality didn't reflect, what they had told us it would. Let's take the next clip.
When Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry learned his state was receiving private money to help run elections, he immediately launched an investigation.
What we found in the first week of our investigation was that there were parishes in Louisiana that seemed to have been targeted, right? And those parishes were mostly Democratic parishes. And so they were basically bypassing or just kind of glossing over the more rural areas of the state and looking to hone their money into the more urbanized or democratically concentrated parishes.
While the grants were open to jurisdictions on a nonpartisan basis in accordance with the law, key Democrat areas apparently received advance notice.
Oh, imagine that. Key Democrat areas received advance notice. Russ, we're going to go to the next clip pretty quickly. Louisiana was not the only state. Remember how important Georgia was? Remember, at times, the entire election was pinned on Georgia? Well, let's look at what happened there. Take that clip.
I've never seen anything like this. Georgia seems to have always been a place where elections have been fair and honest and upright. And all of a sudden, this past one, everything seemed to be a huge question mark. There was an enormous amount of money thrown into this race, and I believe that helped influence the outcome.
$45 million was spent in Georgia alone, and We showed that that actually moved the needle anywhere from 2 to 3%, and that would have made the difference in Georgia in the outcome.
In my mind, they were clearly rigging the election. I'm not convinced that the election was stolen on Election Day. I think the bigger story was that across the whole country for months, there was an effort to rig the election to make it virtually impossible for Trump to win.
If I were a political operative and I told you, a candidate, I can shift you big counties by 13.5 points, you couldn't write checks fast enough to me.
And we're finding out what they did. There were communications with key election officials, and one of those election officials is the Secretary of State of Georgia, whose goal in life appeared to be to make himself adored by the left.
The Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for everything you and your colleagues are doing. We are so grateful to see democracy in action in Georgia.
And he was totally afraid of Stacey Abrams. So the money that flowed into Georgia, a lot of it came through the Secretary of State's office.
The consent decree was an agreement pushed by Democrats and failed gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, and signed off on by Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. The agreement undercut the process for matching signatures on absentee ballots.
Imagine that. Undercut the process for matching signatures on absentee ballots. Folks, there is a lot more. I've actually got more on my call sheet here, but we are out of time. I was going to play for you more audio from President Trump, more video of President Trump responding to the film. By the way, he now calls this his favorite movie ever. If you want to get a copy of what President Trump is calling his favorite movie of all time, you can go to rigged2020.com, rigged2020.com. There you can pick up a copy of this film. This is the film that stopped Zuckerberg. This is the film that exposed what actually happened in the 2020 election. You can pick up a copy at rigged2020.com for just $4.99. That is going to be it for us. We will be back to regular episodes later this week. Remember, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Let's see here. Anything else? Yes, if you're watching online, be sure to click the subscribe button. Also, leave a comment. That'll make it more likely that our information, our shows, our videos will show up in your feed. That's super important. Also, if you appreciate what we're doing, if you are in the fight with us, if you believe in fighting for America, fighting for conservatism, fighting for patriotism, fighting for Christianity, we would love your active support. Just by watching our videos, just by watching the show, just by reading articles at westernjournal.com, you are helping us. But if you would like to partner in a more direct way, you can go to westernjournal.com/join. That's westernjournal.com/join. All right, that is it for us for this episode. Remember, rigged2020.com. You can get your copy of the film there for $4.99. And that's it until we see you this coming Wednesday. Thanks. Have a great day.